For these 6 individuals, what began as routine television appearances became their final moments, broadcast live to audiences who witnessed tragedy unfold in real time, from community celebrations to educational programs. It was November 14, 2013, when a crisp 52-degree morning settled over a small community television studio on the outskirts of Detroit, where a local morning program was preparing its annual Thanksgiving recipe segment. Catherine Kate Morrison adjusted her apron nervously as she arranged ingredients for her great-grandmother's stuffing recipe on the demonstration counter. At 48, the suburban mother of 3 had won the station's viewer recipe contest. With her unique combination of cornbread, Italian sausage, and dried cranberries. Kate worked as a part-time bookkeeper, but had always dreamed of opening her own catering business, viewing this television appearance as a potential stepping stone toward that goal. Kate's family recipe had been passed down through 4 generations, with each woman adding her own special touch. Her great-grandmother had brought the original version from Ireland in 1892, adapting it to available American ingredients. Kate's grandmother had added the Italian sausage during the Depression. Her mother incorporated the dried cranberries in the 1970s, and Kate had perfected the cornbread base that made the stuffing uniquely hers. Kate had been experiencing mild chest discomfort for several days, but attributed it to pre-television nerves and holiday stress. She had been working extra hours at her bookkeeping job to afford the premium ingredients, often staying up late to perfect her presentation. Her family later revealed that Kate had been taking over-the-counter antacids regularly, but never mentioned any serious health concerns. The live segment began smoothly, as Kate explained the historical significance of her recipe while efficiently combining ingredients. Her natural warmth impressed the hosts, who commented on her potential for a cooking show of her own. Kate beamed with pride as she described how each generation had contributed to the recipe's evolution. Midway through the demonstration, Kate began perspiring heavily, despite the studio's cool temperature. She paused briefly to wipe her forehead with a kitchen towel, joking about the hot studio lights making her nervous. The hosts laughed along, not recognizing the early signs of cardiac distress. Kate continued mixing, but her movements became increasingly labored, and her breathing grew shallow. As Kate reached for the final ingredient, dried cranberries, she suddenly gripped the edge of the counter, and her face contorted in pain. She attempted to continue the demonstration, but her left arm went numb and she dropped the measuring cup, scattering cranberries across the studio floor. Kate's complexion had turned ashen, and she was struggling to speak. Kate collapsed behind the demonstration counter, suffering a massive heart attack while the segment was airing live on the small community station. The cameras continued running for several seconds before the control room cut to a standby graphic. Paramedics arrived within 4 minutes, but she had already gone into cardiac arrest. Despite sustained resuscitation efforts, she was pronounced dead at a nearby medical center about 45 minutes later. The station later confirmed that several viewers had contacted their front desk after the broadcast cut abruptly. Kate's family struggled with the suddenness of her death and the fact that it unfolded publicly. The station quietly discontinued the annual recipe contest, and her family later contributed her stuffing recipe to a small memorial booklet shared within their community, with proceeds supporting local heart health programs. It was April 3, 2014. When a warm 78-degree afternoon settled over a small regional news studio on the outskirts of Phoenix. The weekly community feature segment was running on a tight budget like always, and the aging facility showed it: flickering lights, intermittent power dips, and equipment that had been patched together for years. Staff had reported brief shocks from handheld microphones earlier that week, but with no backup gear and no maintenance staff available, the issues had been logged and ignored. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Vargas, 52, sat under the overhead lights as a technician applied quick powder to reduce shine. The Army veteran had recently returned from his 4th deployment and had been nominated by a local veterans group for the station's Community Impact series. He preferred to keep a low profile, but he agreed to the feature after learning the segment focused on service, not combat stories. Marcus had built a 3-decade career in the Army, following the path of his father and grandfather before him. He and his wife Sarah had juggled constant relocations, deployments, and parenting 3 children. Now, with retirement 2 years away, he hoped to earn a master's degree in education and eventually teach high school history. The studio's electrical issues surfaced again minutes before going live when one of the overhead fixtures flickered sharply, but the crew assumed it was another harmless power dip. When the cameras rolled, the interview progressed smoothly. Marcus spoke with calm clarity about mentorship, leadership, and his plans to teach after leaving the service. The anchors appreciated his steadiness on camera, and the control room continued the segment as planned. Mid-sentence, a loud pop sounded from the junction box feeding the studio's lighting grid. A brief electrical fault surged through a damaged grounding wire that ran beneath the interview set. The metal-framed chair Marcus was sitting in became energized for a fraction of a second, long enough for a lethal current to pass through his body before the circuit breaker tripped. Marcus stiffened instantly, his posture freezing as his muscles seized. His hands clenched at the armrests, and he slid sideways in the chair. The anchors, startled, paused mid-question, unsure whether he was fainting or reacting to something off-camera. The control room cut to a standby graphic only after noticing the sudden collapse. When the crew reached him, Marcus was unresponsive and showing no signs of breathing. A faint electrical odor lingered near the base of the chair, and a scorched mark on the metal frame indicated where the current had traveled. Paramedics arrived in under 3 minutes, beginning CPR and attempting defibrillation, but his heart remained in persistent cardiac arrest. He was transported to a nearby hospital, where he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. OSHA investigators later determined that outdated wiring, inadequate grounding, and deferred electrical maintenance had created conditions for a low-voltage but still lethal electrical fault. The station received multiple citations and was forced to complete a full electrical overhaul before resuming broadcasts. Marcus's family pursued a wrongful death settlement, and local stations across the region quietly adopted updated electrical inspection requirements to prevent similar incidents. It was September 19, 2015, and the early autumn weather brought comfortable 68-degree temperatures to a small local educational studio in San Diego, where the program Science Explorers was filming a new segment on marine biology. The production area was modest and had recently been updated with new overhead lighting, including a large fixture positioned above the demonstration table. The lights had been installed only 2 weeks earlier, but the mounting hardware had already shown minor issues, including a slow downward tilt that several crew members had attributed to normal settling. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, 41, arranged a series of preserved marine specimens on the table as the camera operators completed their checks. A marine biologist with 15 years of field research, she had recently returned from an expedition documenting coral bleaching patterns. Her work had become increasingly focused on public education, and she considered the show an important way to communicate urgent environmental concerns to young viewers. Jennifer's interest in marine science began early in life, shaped by childhood experiences that introduced her to ocean ecosystems and conservation work. She later pursued advanced studies in marine biology, focusing on reef restoration and long-term ecological risks. Over the years, she became known for research that emphasized practical solutions and community education. The television program grew out of her desire to make science more accessible to younger audiences, and she remained closely involved in developing each episode's content. A few minutes before filming, one of the camera operators noticed slight movement in the overhead lighting grid. The fixture above the demonstration table angled lower than usual. Though it remained within what the crew believed was a safe position, the shift appeared subtle enough that no immediate action was taken, and production continued according to schedule. When the cameras went live, Jennifer began explaining coral ecosystem relationships with her usual clarity, using models and preserved specimens to illustrate how different species depended on one another. She moved around the table confidently, occasionally glancing toward the camera to emphasize key points for viewers. As she lifted a preserved sea turtle specimen to demonstrate adaptation strategies, the mounting bracket of the overhead fixture experienced a sudden mechanical failure. The hardware, already weakened by improper installation and minor stress on the grid, gave way without significant warning. The fixture fell directly toward the demonstration area from a height of several feet. The light struck Jennifer as she stood at the center of the table, causing her to collapse immediately onto the studio floor. The impact disabled the fixture's internal wiring, and the surrounding area went dim as the circuit tripped. Crew members rushed to her side and called emergency services within seconds, but she remained unresponsive. Paramedics arrived in just under 5 minutes and began assessment and resuscitation efforts. She was transported to a nearby hospital, where she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival due to severe head and upper body trauma consistent with a heavy impact accident. Following the incident, the station suspended all studio operations. OSHA investigators determined that improper mounting hardware and insufficient secondary safety supports had contributed to the equipment failure, where she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival due to severe head and upper body trauma consistent with a heavy impact accident. Supporting early career marine science educators was later created in Jennifer's name by colleagues who had worked closely with her on educational outreach. It was February 8, 2016. And the winter morning brought a sharp 23-degree chill to a small Boston-based production studio, preparing to air a live Valentine's Day episode of its regional cooking program. The set, designed to resemble a compact home kitchen, had undergone routine equipment servicing the week before, including maintenance on a gas range used for on-camera demonstrations. The work had been completed near the end of the technician's shift, and one of the fittings had not been tightened to proper torque, leaving a connection vulnerable to gradual separation under thermal and vibration stress. Tony Ricci, 56, organized his ingredients with the steady movements of someone who had spent decades in a professional kitchen. He had built a long career in the food industry, known locally for creating dishes rooted in long-standing family traditions. The show's producers invited him to demonstrate a slow-cooked winter recipe, viewing his appearance as a way to bring warmth and familiarity to an otherwise cold season. Cooking had shaped Tony's life from an early age. Over the years, he had become recognized within the regional dining community for emphasizing simple, well-prepared meals using traditional methods. His participation in the program reflected his interest in helping home cooks feel more confident in the kitchen, a theme he often revisited during guest appearances. As the crew finished camera checks, a faint odor of gas briefly circulated near the rear of the set, but with multiple dishes prepped and numerous heat sources active, it went unnoticed. The weakened connection beneath the range had begun to leak small amounts of natural gas at a rate too subtle to trigger immediate alarms. Because the ventilation hood operated at a low setting for audio clarity, the gas accumulated slowly in the area surrounding the cooktop. Filming began smoothly as the live segment went on air, with Tony explaining the preparation steps with a steady conversational pace while browning ingredients in a heavy pan. As he transitioned to a low-heat phase of the recipe, he attempted to adjust one of the burners that had extinguished during a pan shift. When he pressed the ignition control, the electrical spark ignited the pocket of accumulated gas surrounding the range. The ignition produced a rapid flash fire rather than a large explosion. A brief pressure wave pushed equipment backward, and the flame front extended outward several feet before dissipating. The flash was visible on air for a moment before the control room switched the broadcast to a standby graphic. Tony, standing closest to the point of ignition, was knocked against the counter by the force of the flash and immediately fell to the floor. Crew members saw a burst of flame sweep across the cooktop area, but did not witness any ongoing fire, as the flash extinguished as quickly as it formed. The studio alarm system activated within seconds, prompting an immediate evacuation and emergency call. Paramedics reached the scene in under 4 minutes and found Tony unresponsive with signs of severe thermal injuries concentrated on his upper body and face. He was transported to a nearby hospital, where physicians initiated advanced treatment, but his injuries were not survivable. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. It was August 12, 2017, and the midday heat reached 94 degrees in Atlanta as a small regional television studio prepared to air a live episode of its Saturday morning educational program for children. The production featured an elaborate chemistry demonstration set, complete with laboratory equipment and chemical storage cabinets that had been installed to make science education more engaging for young viewers. Rebecca "Miss Becky" Johnson, 38, arranged her materials with the practiced organization she used in her elementary school classroom. She had taught for more than a decade and often volunteered during summer months to lead televised lessons intended to support young learners. Her focus for the day was a basic introduction to chemical reactions, using safe household materials to demonstrate how different substances interact when combined. Education had shaped most of Rebecca's adult life. She had earned her teaching credentials through a local university and had become known in her district for developing approachable lessons that helped students with varying learning needs. Participating in the show allowed her to extend that style to a broader audience, and she approached each segment with the same preparation she used in her regular classroom. Earlier that morning, members of the technical team had noticed a strong chemical odor coming from the storage cabinet containing cleaning supplies used for the demonstrations. The cabinet's ventilation system had malfunctioned, causing dangerous fumes to accumulate inside the enclosed space. However, the maintenance crew assumed the smell was from the previous day's cleaning and failed to investigate further or test the air quality before the live broadcast. The episode began on schedule, with Rebecca introducing the chemistry lesson in a calm, upbeat tone. She moved between the demonstration table and the chemical storage cabinet while speaking directly to the camera. As part of her planned lesson, she opened the cabinet to retrieve what she believed were safe household cleaning products for a simple reaction demonstration. As Rebecca opened the cabinet door, a dense buildup of trapped chlorine fumes drifted outward into the studio, spreading quickly through the small, poorly ventilated space. The gas had formed when incompatible cleaning chemicals had been improperly stored together, creating a deadly mixture that had been accumulating overnight in the poorly ventilated cabinet. Rebecca immediately began coughing and gasping as the toxic fumes overwhelmed her respiratory system. She staggered backward from the cabinet, her eyes streaming and her breathing becoming increasingly labored as the chlorine gas burned her lungs and throat. The invisible poison quickly spread throughout the small studio space. The live feed captured Rebecca's distress as she collapsed to her knees, clutching her throat and struggling to breathe. The director in the control room cut immediately to a standby graphic as studio staff rushed to help, but they too began experiencing respiratory distress from the toxic gas cloud. Emergency responders arrived in under 4 minutes, wearing protective breathing equipment, and found Rebecca unresponsive but still breathing shallowly, with clear signs of severe chemical inhalation injury. She was transported to a nearby hospital and placed on assisted ventilation, but her lungs rapidly filled with fluid from acute chlorine-induced pulmonary edema. Despite treatment, she died several hours later from respiratory failure. A post-incident investigation concluded that improper chemical storage and a malfunctioning ventilation system had allowed chlorine gas to accumulate inside the cabinet. The studio suspended all production while investigators completed a full safety audit, and regulators later issued fines and required stricter handling protocols for any on-air demonstrations involving chemicals. Her colleagues created a small educational grant in her name to support teachers developing safe science lessons for young students. It was May 15, 2018, and the late spring afternoon brought a mild 72-degree breeze through a small Seattle-based studio as the regional program Pacific Northwest Outdoors prepared to air its live season finale. The set featured a compact indoor trail simulation area used for demonstrating gear, safety practices, and basic wilderness movement techniques. For this broadcast, the production team had arranged a narrow wooden bridge prop to illustrate how hikers could assess footing on unstable or weathered surfaces. Mike Harrison, 44, reviewed the day's materials while checking the demonstration equipment. He had spent more than 15 years guiding small groups through forested terrain across the region, focusing on beginner-friendly education and responsible outdoor habits. His television appearances were meant to help new hikers feel more comfortable navigating trails, and he approached each broadcast with the same measured clarity he used on his guided trips. Mike's path into outdoor education had been shaped by years spent backpacking through state parks and working with youth groups. Over time, he became known within the local outdoor community for teaching practical skills without dramatization, simple, steady techniques to help people avoid getting hurt or lost. The program valued his calm approach, and the finale was built around basic demonstrations meant for families beginning to explore the outdoors in warmer months. Earlier that week, The studio's small bridge prop had undergone adjustments to improve camera visibility. A new support hinge had been installed on one side to allow the structure to fold for storage, but the hinge was not properly secured. During the morning setup, members of the crew noticed a slight shift in the platform when weight was applied near the outer edge. With the segment scheduled tightly, they stabilized the bridge with temporary bracing beneath the center panel, assuming it would remain steady for a brief demonstration. When the live broadcast began, Mike introduced the segment's theme, recognizing unstable terrain and identifying common hazards on maintained trails. He moved along the demonstration area, explaining how weathering and erosion could weaken natural crossings. Approaching the wooden bridge prop, he described the importance of testing footing before fully committing weight. As he stepped onto the structure for the on-air demonstration, the temporary bracing beneath the bridge shifted. The unsecured hinge on the side support rotated unexpectedly, allowing the bridge deck to tilt sharply downward. Mike attempted to adjust his footing, but the sudden drop caused him to fall sideways off the edge of the platform. The live feed showed his unexpected fall for a moment, before the control room cut to a standby graphic. Studio staff reached him within seconds. Mike had landed forcefully on the lower section of the set, striking the side of his torso and head against the rigid support frame beneath the bridge prop. He was unresponsive when the crew assessed him. Emergency responders arrived in under 4 minutes and initiated advanced life support procedures. Mike was transported to a nearby hospital, where medical staff identified severe internal injuries consistent with a high-impact fall onto a rigid surface. Despite continued efforts, he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. A subsequent investigation determined that the hinge installation had been incomplete and that the temporary bracing did not provide reliable stabilization for live demonstration use. The studio discontinued use of collapsible set pieces and implemented stricter pre-broadcast equipment checks. Colleagues later created a small outdoor safety education initiative in Mike's name to support beginner hikers learning basic field awareness skills. Thanks for watching. Click the next video to discover more shocking stories.